got Florence talking about one-room schools in Manitoba, and you're also going to talk about the Spetch School.
Just briefly.
Yeah.
Yeah. My first 2 years of teaching were in Manitoba, and I started in a one-room school in 1956. It was about 350 miles from home, north. It was up on the shores of Lake Winnipegosis. And it was in a farming community. I have to say, it was quite a shock, because I had gone to what they called a consolidated school, which was grades 1 to 11, and then we had to go into town to get grade 12. And I hadn't seen a one-room school. I didn't know what I was getting into. But anyway, when my aunt and uncle drove me up to Campbellton, which was the area where I was teaching, and I got settled into the teacherage, and we went over and looked at the school. It was this white building. It was sitting up on kind of like cement blocks, about, I would say 2 feet off the ground. And there was no skirting or anything around it. And went in the door, and it was the cloakroom, and you went into the classroom, and there were all these desks sitting there, and the teacher's desk, and there was a little cupboard in the corner where you had the supplies, paper and whatnot. And there was a little square room at the back, and I took a look in there, and it was a semblance of a library. There were a few books on the shelves and whatnot. Not much. There was a wash stand with a wash basin and a bucket and a dipper hanging on the wall. And pretty primitive. They did have electricity. We had electric lights. That was one thing. Anyway, I got settled in, and the first day of school rolled around, and the kids started arriving, and I started looking at these report cards, and I thought I'd landed in Eden by the looks of the marks. You know, marvelous. And then I soon discovered that over a period of 7 years, they had permit teachers. Now, I don't know whether you have those out here, but in Manitoba, they used to take kids out of grade 11 and 12, and they'd give them 6 weeks training in somewhere in Winnipeg, and then put them into these little country schools to teach school. And anyhow, a lot of them came from the area. They went back to the area where they grew up to teach in these little schools. And I discovered that there were children up from in the primary grades that couldn't even read. They didn't know, and yet they had these marvelous marks. So anyhow, the challenge was there. I remember I was supposed to have 2 grade 1 students. There were 24 in the class the first year, grades 1 to 8. And there were supposed to be 2 students in grade 1. Well, there was 1, and this little boy wasn't showing up. And finally, about a week and a half later, this truck pulls up at school just around 9 o'clock. Out gets this lady with this kid in her arms. He's screaming and kicking and hollering. She walks up to me and she says, "Here." I took him. I got this kid in my arms, and she turned around and she left. And so I took him into the classroom and sat him down on the floor, stood him on the floor, and took him by the hand and I said, "This is your desk, put your stuff in it." And so looked at me, he quit bawling, and he started putting his stuff in his desk. But this went on for about 2 weeks. Every morning, the same performance. And then all of a sudden he decided that he wanted to come to school and he liked school. Then after that, he told his mother she didn't need to bring him anymore. He'd just go down with Grandpa. And so he'd arrive and he'd walk in and he was funny. And I have to say that that first morning though, I can remember that like it was yesterday. Because, right, I was 19. I was fresh out of normal school. I'd never been away from home. Standing up there in front of the class, and in those days we had to sing "O Canada," we had to say the Lord's Prayer, and we had a Bible reading. And I can remember, I'm sure that under my skirt, my knees were just going like this. Because, again, there were students in that classroom that were just about as old as I was.
Yeah.
You know, I had this one young fellow that had TB of the bone, and he'd spent an awful lot of his time in the Children's Hospital in Winnipeg, and he was pretty spoiled, and he was 18, and he was there in grade 7. I guess there were times when he couldn't, like, because he did get tutoring or schooling when he was in the hospital, but maybe there were times when he was too sick to, you know. Anyway, it was, and he was bigger than I was.
Oh, good.
So, you know, I used to think, what happens, you know, if he gets out of line. But he used to bully the little kids, and that, I had to put a stop to that. But, and other than that, you know, it was, I really liked teaching. I liked the kids. They were all so willing to learn. They all came from hard-working backgrounds, and when they came to school, they were there to learn. And there wasn't a lot of problem. And like Ruth said, in a one-room school, the older kids helped the younger kids. And they, and that what I did with these primary kids that couldn't read, that were in, you know, grade 3 and 2 and that, as we had reading all together, they all learned to read together. And but I'd had a meeting with the parents, and I said that the marks that were in the report cards were not indicative of what they had, you know, they weren't true. And I said from now on, and I said the first report cards might be quite a shock, but they're going to earn every mark they get, and there's not going to be any padding of the, you know, Creekside School. And so, anyway, it was a good, that year, Mount Curry, that her stepfather, Bill Spetch, had inquired, because their children were doing, June and her brother, and I don't know if there was her half-brother yet, were doing school by correspondence. And he inquired as to how many students did you need to have a one-room school? And he was told 7. So, okay, so he said he built this school at Creekside, or Spetch Landing, or whatever they called it. And it was a one-room school with an attached teacherage. And so I said to her, well, who went to the school? And she said, well, she said there was myself and my brother. There was Teddy Bacady, and I can't remember if his sister's name was Betty. Anyway, his sister. There was George Purdon and his brother. And that was 6. And there was a short one. So he hired this guy to work for him, and the guy was married, and he had a son. And the proviso was, he has to go to school. So they got the 7. And they got a teacher. And then she said, within the next year or 2, there were a couple more kids came, and so they had 9. And she said, I went to that school, I got my grade 7, and then she said they shipped me off to Vancouver, to a school where there was 2,500 kids.
Oh, God.
She said, talk about culture shock. But anyhow, this is just a little tidbit of something that happened here in a one-room school, you know. And I found it quite interesting, so I said, do you mind if I, and she said, no, not at all.
This was
Go ahead.
June Perkins.
June Perkins,
Yeah.
yes. She, because her and I walk every morning.